Hello everyone. Nice
Magandang
to see all of
hapon.
you. Okay, I guess I'll share my screen, our screen. Augil will come after my discussion, and I hope this will not be too much for you this morning or this afternoon. Sorry, it's morning here. Okay, great. Okay. So uh, I think we before we begin, I think we had a long day of discussion since Perma V with Professor Neil Quintanar up until this afternoon with Dr. Bacchiano. But of course, before we begin our talk, since it's going to be quite a summation, no, of the entire Congress, somewhat coming into full circle, we would like to put forward our own positionalities. We are social constructivists. We are qualitative researchers, psychology teachers who work in a non-sectarian and relatively progressive academic institutions. And we acknowledge the privileges these afford to us as speakers, your speakers today. And we are speaking today positioned with entitled and unentitled capital from our experiences as teachers and researchers of psychology. Now, um, uh, oftentimes we're being bombarded with a lot of terminologies, no? And we would like to offer you this new insight about how we should approach the teaching of psychology via the use of research. So, first question is, where are you with psychology? Since this morning, pinag-uusapan po natin how we should manage our classes, right? Our being teachers of psychology, what are the topics and activities that we use, and that goes along with pedagogy. But if you are intuitively listening since this morning, you may have noticed that most of the talks have embedded themselves in the grounds of research. The talk since this morning would not have come about without the propensity of research in psychology. And I hope that you understand that as teachers of psychology, knowledge is constructed and shared. We construct this knowledge. And given from our point of view and from our positionality, this is how we understand knowledge. And when it comes to the ecology, a system that we have as teachers, no, our classroom, our curriculum, our syllabi, our competencies, and the materials that we use is all part of this ecosystem. And I hope that we do not forget that this ecosystem is more complex than we think and more uh, intertwined and interwoven. No? It's not just a linear process that we engage in as teachers of psychology. And this is where we would like to put forward, no, and to remind you that since this morning, the topics have been trying to remind you that you have an agency as teachers. And when we talk about agency, that means that you have control, that you have an intention to produce something, that your actions as teachers are always in has a semblance has some intentionality that is directed to a particular purpose, and we would like to believe that that purpose is for your students to have um, some learning for whatever psychology course that they have enrolled in with you, no? So however, we must also remember that in this particular ecosystem that we have as teachers of psychology and within the field of psychology, we are within a particular context, cultural, social, political, economic, and we have heard of this. We have heard of this since this morning. So, um, what is now? What are we going to talk about? No, perhaps you might be quite intimidated with the term bricolage. It's actually coined by um, uh, Claude Levi-Strauss, a social anthropologist, and it's a French term. It has a French etymology. Essentially, this is a very simple metaphor of how pedagogy and research should come together. No? What is it? Was it? What does bricolage try to propose? That in this very complex life that we have, in this very complex set of behaviors, interactions, love, kanina pinag-uusapan ni Dr. Maciano, relationships, grief, no, mental health, we have to creatively put them together, make sense out of it. And that's what we do as teachers. We are practically bricoleurs, no? We call ourselves bricoleurs of psychology because we do have a curriculum. But as much as we want to follow the curriculum, there is some part of our agency as teachers that we want to rip ourselves out of that. And that entails for us to be creative, to be innovative, to be curators of knowledge. And what is the call of being a bricolage in the process of this entire teaching learning dynamic? No? Ang goal po nito is for you to professionally look at how you set your standards and behaviors in order for you to translate into transformative learning for your students. Because at the end of the day, grades are grades, right? But what do they actually mean to your students? What does it actually mean to you as teachers? What does it mean to your psychology programs in your departments or your colleges? No? So what we're trying to emphasize here is the utility and function of knowledge that you put forward in every psychology course. Regardless 101 ba yan, seminar course ba yan, research course ba yan, methods course ba yan, theory course ba yan, no? So essentially what bricolage is actually is a metaphor, no? It's a process of actually putting together knowledge. You create this knowledge and you make sure that this knowledge translates to what is supposed to be meaningful to you and to your students, okay? But as we would like to emphasize as well, this knowledge is not born out of anything or not out of nothing. And Dr. emphasized this earlier, that everything comes from research. And if you would remember, no, even in your undergrad, as much as we want to run away from variables, we cannot run away from research because the heart of psychology is research. And no matter which paradigm you're inclined to adhere to, you cannot do away with research. And as teachers, you have to understand that at the core and center of the teaching of psychology, whether it's concepts, principles, or theories, they don't mean anything unless they are propelled and motivated and directed by research. So what actually bricolage in psychological inquiry and teaching emphasizes is meaning making. You put together your syllabus, your course outline, your course pack if naka-remote learning kayo. Pero what does it mean to you? What does it mean to your students? How do you make sense of it? Or just putting it all together? Parang nagluluto kayo na wala kayong recipe, no? However, as practitioners, as psychology teachers, and some of us are curriculum developers, we understand there are certain standards that we have to adhere to. But we have to remember as well that this meaning process and meaning making or sense making processes are necessitate creativity and innovativeness. And no matter how much you want to stay in line, draw with or color within the lines, it's too clean, and knowledge is not that clean. And this is what research offers us. It provides us with a wide array of horizons, of choices, of perspectives, of critical thought, of the way to see the world. Because at the end of the day, we have to make sure that our actions as teachers, our plans as research is informed by uh, research, informed by your sense of criticality, your sense of creativity. So, what is the challenge? Oftentimes po, we get so wrapped up with the prescriptions, no? I understand kanina po, you mentioned a lot about the CMO and all those prescriptions, no, of CHED and all that, no? And oftentimes we forget that we need to be flexible and we need to be fluid. And it's wonderful to see comments earlier about, oh, I want this to be part of the elective of our curriculum. We want to create something like this. And that is exactly what we want to encourage you to do, no? And that's why we have this congress for you to think outside the box, no? The limits of research is only within you. Ikaw lang ang nagpe-prevent ng limitations niya yan, no? So in teaching of psychology courses, from course design and development, your contextual resources, and the way you teach the course should be informed by a bricolage of research, no? The process of putting together creatively and innovatively, mindfully, no? And critically, the things that you need to make your syllabus work or your teaching of psychology work. So hindi lang po tayo nagtuturo out of nowhere, no? Example of which that I think DepEd have been emphasizing contextualization. That's a buzzword, no, for DepEd teachers. And that's precisely it, no? Because oftentimes nakakalimutan po natin that 99% of our resources are Western based, no? And it's very unfortunate that our worldview is so Western that we cannot expand the diversity of our knowledge from within our context, and that limits us, no? And the process of bricolage, or being a teacher bricoleur, allows you to open your mind to what's already what you have. What do you have? You have history, you have rituals, you have rights, you have relationships, Filipino relationships. No, as much as we're talking about close personal relations, there is something uniquely Filipino about Filipino relationships, right? There is something uniquely regional about, let's say, Visayan relationships, or a phenomena of some sort, or psychological phenomena, or even a disaster responsiveness and mental health. It's not a prescription brought about by, European or Western thought. We have to be mindful that we have our own, no? So we draw our meaning making from that, and we encourage our teachers to be this kind of bricoleurs. No, there are 5 types. You might not necessarily be all, but at least have a little of everything. No, since we are operating in an ecosystem as teachers, no, of psychology, we need to wear different hats, and in different courses, we have different approaches or different positionalities. And oftentimes, we forget because 10, 20 years na tayo nagtuturo, hindi na change ang ating positionalities because we've been so stuck with the textbook. We've been so stuck with, sa mga slides na nire-request niyo sa inyong mga webinars, no? Oftentimes, you just keep them in your drive and forget about them, and you get surprised yourself after a couple of months, nandito pala to, no? But you don't actually use them, and what you have with you is already actually in front of you that you can use, no? So there are 5 types of bricoleurs as teacher researchers, no? The interpretive bricoleur is very important because lahat po ng ating psychological phenomena ay drawn from our our texts, our subjective positionings as teachers. No, whatever psychological phenomenon we are teaching, we always have a position, a subjective positioning to it, and this is our interpretation. Think about how you explain to your student a psychological concept. Let's say, for instance, love, diba? Or language, or cognition. You take a position. It is your interpretation. So, but you have to remember, this is a reminder again for teachers, no, that there is no one perspective and there's no one truth. Remember that your interpretation is based on your point of view. That's why before we started this talk, no, we already put forward our positionality, because the concept of bricolage, the process of it, has actually drawn from social constructivist and post uh, post-structuralist perspective. No, so if you're the type to be very prescriptive and objective, that there is only one truth, that there should be no bias, then this is something that you have to be uncomfortable with. And discomfort is okay, because it allows you to reflect, right? Secondly, you have to be a methodological bricoleur. What does that mean? When you talk about, when you discuss a particular psychological concept, or let's say, for instance, theories of personality, that's a very popular course, and that's a very important course in our curriculum. No? When you look at the methods that are informing theories of personality, you can see a pattern, you can see differences, you can see similarities. So you have to notice these things. You have to be mindful of these things, so that your students will be able to understand that this particular theory of personality is drawn from this particular methodological standpoint. Okay? So, hindi po pwede nabibigay tayo ng personality test, nag-explain tayo ng components ng personality test, okay na yon. Because pag hindi po natin na-appreciate kung saan nanggaling ito, we won't value it. Look at the Myers-Briggs. No? We've believed it for so long, no? And we've all of a sudden, it blew up in our faces and was, disproven. No? Third, which is, I think, one of my important things, not that we have to remind ourselves, that you also have to be a theoretical bricoleur. Most of our students get so attracted with Freud. The moment that they meet Freud in your Psych 101, they get so excited with him. But there, as you well know, if you teach Psychology 101, there are several perspectives. And oftentimes, these theoretical perspectives are dated. And this is what we are encouraging you to do. No? If theories are born from a particular time and generation, they do get to be obsolete at some point. Yes, they maintain their prestige, they maintain their essence. No, we cite them, we quote them, but it is important that we also take into account that these theories have evolved through time. And that's what your students should understand when you're teaching a particular psychological concept, that this particular psychological concept has evolved through time with the theories that have propelled it. Okay? So, sabi nga ni Kinkoy and Barry, there are questions that don't lend themselves to easy answers. And that is the beauty of psychology. There is no one answer to one psychological question. No, there will always be as many concepts and theories that could explain perspectives. No? So there's a plurality of these complexities, and I hope that as teachers we are mindful of this. And then again, I think this is the call of the times, because we also need to be political bricoleurs. What does that mean? We have to break down hegemonic forms of inquiry. For the longest time, survey method was the perpetual go-to of thesis methods. No, or merong mga methodological trends in times. But now we're going to even post-humanists going towards perspective or going to that approach. And not only in methodology, but also in terms of how we view, for example, um, uh, psychological concepts. For instance, gender and sexuality, no, it has evolved drastically through time, and I hope, no, you have broken through the hegemonic understanding and very oppressive post-colonial uh, uh, or colonial, sorry, not post-colonial, but colonial ideas of gender and sexuality. No, so if you want to break that down, preferably you would read Butler or Foucault, no, for that. And the last is the narrative bricoleur. Now, why is this important? Because narratives are representations, no? And what is important when you discuss certain psychological concepts, you need to give voices to those who have not been voiced in textbooks, generally. For example, aging. It's a very common top psychological concept, no? Life course perspective and whatnot. No? But they always discuss it in a very heteronormative way or mainstream way. How about populations like, for example, um, uh, transgender women or transgender people who are aging, or crypt theory, for example, are going towards that, which talks about those who are physically challenged or blind, no, or yeah, disabled. Anong voice nila in aging? Are they there? Are they represented? No? Oftentimes, ang mga marginalized communities or marginalized groups are not being tackled in textbooks. And this is what we have in the Philippines. We have so many issues and so many psychological concepts that actually apply to us that we don't use. And oftentimes we draw from whatever it is na popular sa social media, but we don't look to our immediate communities and draw from our contextual motivations. So, as a teacher of psychology, how do you do psychology? First, we have to understand that pedagogy itself, the practice of teaching, is a bricolage. And you have to curate and strategize and design your course syllabus mindfully and critically. No? And it's important that when you use psychological research as a resource for your teaching, it has to serve a utility and function. Hindi porke binibigay mo lang yan at pinapabasa mo and that's it, no? It has to serve its function. And I think PSSP people would love this because etong kanilang advocacy for the longest time, and even us in the teaching psychology, that we need to decolonize psychology. What does it mean? No, we need to create our own methodologies. We need to create our own theories. We need to contextualize our psychology. And it's not enough that it's just Filipino psychologies. There are specific contexts that can apply in terms of psychological concepts. And what's important is you recognize your biases. We recognize the bias from the start. We're not well. I'm, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not good at statistics. I don't see the world in a hyper realistic way because I know it's very critical, realistic, or at the very most relativistic. So there is no one single truth, and subjectivity or being subjective is not a bias, but actually rigor in when you're trying to do or engage something because you're being honest and authentic in your teaching and in your research. And as much as we want to encourage you, why we're here doing this Congress is because we want you to appreciate psychology beyond the concepts and the textbooks that are being using, no? Especially with the use of psychological research to inform your teaching. And make sure that also you use these tools for teaching in terms of how it is meaningful to you. Hindi lang kasi ginagamit ni sir at saka ni ma'am before, gagamitin ko na rin. What is meaningful to you? Paano mo siya mini-make sense para sa mga students mo? And of course, you have to also remind yourself that research is a power-driven act. So importante po yung positionality, whether which paradigm you're adhering to, whether you're quantitative or qualitative, interpretivist or positivist. Because most of the time we think na theory is an explanation of the world. Actually, theory is more an explanation of our relation to the world. And that speaks a lot about how we actually relate to one another, in terms of our psychological teaching or teaching psychology. Just going to break this through. It is troubling to start this off because medyo nakaka-challenge po kasi it's important that we put forward psychological research into our curriculum, into our teaching, and how this psychological research informs the quality of our teaching. So ito po yung mga tips na kailangan natin to remind ourselves why or how do we become teacher researchers of psychology. And I've already emphasized some of this. Make sure po, at pinaka-importante po, ikaw po, you clarify your personal ontological and epistemological position. Ano ba ho ang iyong worldview? Ano pa ho ang view nyo ng reality? So that you are conscious of what you are imparting to your students. Because at the end of the day, you need to be reflexive about what you teach, how you teach it, and what kind of teaching approaches you use. And for your students, ito po ang kailangan natin i-foster with them. Hindi po ninyo pwedeng ma-encourage ang inyong students na mag-discover ng kanilang ontological and epistemological positions kapag hindi nyo po alam yung sarili nyo. So at the end of the day, what happens is you end up imposing onto them what you actually believe and do not give them the exploratory freedom to do it themselves. What else? Ano pa ba? Okay. Yeah, okay. But I would just like to also emphasize in all this, in the entire process of the bricolage, kailangan po yung critical thought. We have to rethink the way we treat our courses. Are we really making sense to our students, or is this just giving them enough information so they can graduate? Or are we trying to disturb their senses? Are we trying to disorient the way they think about psychology so they will become more in love with psychology, in a sense? So it is your challenge now to take on this role. And I will pass you on to Professor Robles to talk to you about how to do this in your courses.
Thank you so much, Moniq, for sharing this space. Good afternoon, everyone. So I just wanted to request a few reactions in the chat box if you can hear me well. For many of us here, educators, psychologists, trainers, and for many of us who really identify as researchers, research can feel inevitable, right? Perhaps some colleagues would even say it is a way of life. I would often joke that some of my colleagues, I'm very proud to say that some of them inhale data and they exhale research. Very productive. But remember that our hope in sharing our passion with you is that we're not only doing this because research is one of the performance metrics through which academics are always measured. Parang nakapublish ka na ba? Marami ka bang na-advise? Our hope is that by heart, we know that research can enrich the science, teaching, and learning of psychology. So this is directly related to the question of para kanino ba tayo nagre-research at bakit tayo nagtuturo ng research sa mga estudyante natin. Now, let's be realistic and say that it also took us a while before we became comfortable with the bolts and knots of research, right? Moniq here perhaps would be a witness to my own growth as a researcher. So our mission is to reframe the common misconceptions about research. So for our students, perhaps, what is most salient is the suffering behind research, no? Na para bang sa isip nila, ang hirap ng research. Kailangan ba siyang gawin? Nakakatakot, no? Gumawa ng research. Our mission is to reframe that a conception that research is a friend and it's not a foe. And for us educators, it's not an afterthought. No, in fact, we should never design courses without incorporating research into it. Dr. Bacchiano earlier mentioned that all of the contents of the design of her delivery of the social psychology of intimate relationships is purely based on research. No? So how do we do that? How do we encourage our students to see research in a more positive light? That's through a mindful integration into our pedagogies. No? So we should be careful, but at the same time, we should be honored that we have this opportunity to shape their minds into having such orientation. So first and foremost, research can help nurture a genuine interest in whatever course topics those are and our science as a whole. When we are designing our courses, we might find ourselves feeling like parang paulit-ulit na yung tinuturo ko. This is the third semester na nagtuturo ako ng cultural psych. Magtuturo na naman ako ng psych stat, no? So what do we do to supplement that? No, we can actually delineate and update the content of our courses, right? So we can check the classic texts, but we can also add more recent researches, diba? So in that way, not only are we keeping the course interesting to us as educators, but also we can keep on relating it to the updated experiences of our students. No? So this is also a reflection from being a student and now from teaching research. We should teach journal article reading as an exercise in itself. We often notice that there is a tendency for us to assume na alam na nila kung paano magbasa ng journal articles, no? Or that it comes natural for our students to read. Now is the time for us to challenge that assumption and do something about it. Remember that critical reading is a skill, and we would encourage you to make journal article reading as an exercise in itself. So bago pa tayo mag-assign ng paper, bago pa tayo magpagawa ng analysis, turuan natin sila paano ba magbasa ng journal article. Iba yan sa pagbabasa natin ng Facebook newsfeed natin, iba yan sa pagbabasa ng lecture slides, iba yan sa pagbabasa ng kung ano mang na-encounter nila na information outside scholarly sources, no? So we teach what? We teach critical reading. And critical reading means actively engaging with the different parts of the article. And by the end of it, you get the gist and the essence of what the article is trying to communicate. At pag nag-focus tayo sa pagtuturo kung paano magbasa ng journal article, we hope that our students would start appreciating what they can understand well. Kasi 'di ba, mahirap naman kasing mahalin ang research kung upon your exposure to journal articles, hindi mo siya alam kung papaano basahin, no? And finally, I'd like to share this very effective exercise to gauge what are the interests of my students. No, are they excited to take this research course? In the beginning of the semester, we ask them to bring one journal article, parang show and tell. No, and then we ask them, why does this study spark joy in you? You'll be fascinated by the answers. No, it will range from this is the latest study on this classic psychological construct, all the way to students saying, this is my advocacy, ma'am. I want to study health inequalities among LGBT communities because I feel personally related to it. 'Diba? So yeah, that's small. Those are small ways, no, that you can do that in your class activities. Second, research is not just about accomplishing the objectives of that study, right? At the bigger scheme of things, it's encouraging scientific thinking, no? Ang tinuturo natin sa mga estudyante natin ay ang tamang pag-iisip, no? Na base sa datos, base sa teorya, at base sa metodo. And we start this, as mentioned by Professor Muyargas earlier, not by imposing a method, no, not by imposing a kind of analysis, but rather start with the acknowledgement of potential research questions. And so if students come to us and say, "Ma'am, pwede ikaw advisor ko." Why? Kasi gusto ko quali. We don't usually respond, no, to those requests. Why? We want them to come to us with a question in mind. No? And with that question, we guide them into looking for the methodologies that can best answer those questions. No? So for more information on this kind of question-led inquiry, you can check Creswell and Griggs, for example. No, those are classic texts, which we will also give you a copy eventually. And most important, no, we show them our own journey as researchers. No? And when I share my experiences as a research, I always include both the hardships and the successes, because it's important for them to have a realistic picture of what happens when you actually do research. No? If the book says that there are steps in research, we say that these are the recommended steps. But in real life, we might have to revisit our earlier steps. We might have to find different frameworks. We might have to counter our own assumptions. So how do we do this? Of course, we encourage you to do your own research. No? If opportunities come to play, please do your own research so that our own examples in class ground from our own experiences. Kung hindi naman po, what we can do is we can invite fellow scholars. No, I think Junix has done this before in class, and other colleagues here, where you invite specialists in certain topics, and then they can give like a brown bag presentation for your students. No, and another important reason why we should incorporate research in our instruction is that it anchors learning in context, no? By way of challenging long-standing theories, yung tinatawag nating giants, no, in psychology, which we still have, no, to this day. I particularly found this relevant, no, when I was preparing the course packs for subjects like Filipino psychology or cultural psychology, where you really have to dismantle all of those assumptions that are based on what we call weird cultures, or yung Western, educated, industrialized, diba? Those cultures are not necessarily representative of our own. So we use research, no, to update and challenge those existing knowledges. So how do we do that? Pwede po tayong magpa-journal article review. So just remember that in requiring a journal article review, we don't just ask them to restate what the studies have said. We ask them to synthesize based on their own understanding. What are the highlights? What are the key contributions? At pinaka-importante po, ano yung critique? No? What is the gap that is yet to be addressed by that study? Okay, and when we do that, that's a way of encouraging them to critically approach the references. No, hindi yung dahil na-publish yung study na yan, it's all that there is, no, to that topic, or that knowledge will forever be relevant. And of course, our continuous call is to maximize the use of local scholarship. No? And sometimes this will require us to really give links to our students, no? Kasi kapag Google Scholar lang, alam naman po natin, because Google Scholar is based on search hits, they can give you results that are quite biased towards certain territories. So please encourage your students to look into local journals. You have the Philippine Journal of Psychology, no? You have the journals of local university, so Diliman Review, Siliman Review, no? So all of those can be valuable local resources for you, no? And of course, no, the biggest question would be, para saan ba ang psychology? No, we are a helping profession and we are existing as a science to better the lives of various communities. And it reaffirms such relevance and significance. So just remember that for our students to find or see themselves in those studies, link them to social issues, especially the most pressing social issues that are yet to be tackled in our society. No? And whenever they propose trainings, programs, interventions, make sure that you ask for them to back those proposals with research. Parang pag sinabi nila, ma'am, gagawa kami ng ganitong training, ano yung review of related literature para ma-justify kung bakit yan ang training? 'Di ba? And finally, please create opportunities no to reinforce evidence-based advocacies no. Gagawin natin siyang final requirement, pwede, but reinforce them in a way that would make them think, ginagawa ko to because people are benefiting from it. Ayan. Also, the Philippine Journal of Social Sciences and Humanities pala. Okay. As another local journal. And last but not the least, I would say no that in my journey as a researcher, what made it stick no from being a student to now an educator is that it inculcated the ethics of care and collaboration. No, working with fellow scholars, we now see the value of that, right? So we have to encourage our students to likewise reflect. No, gagawa tayo ng group work. But what is the principle behind the group work? We want those research teams to self-organize and grow together. But that is, of course, with guidance from our end. No? And when we provide research advising, please remember that when we create like spaces for consultations, feedback sessions, please be patient. No? Kaya natatakot minsan yung students natin eh. That is not to say we don't have standards anymore. Ha? You can be compassionate but still enable learning. No? Still have your standards, have your rubrics, but make sure that you are approachable, calm, and collected when you do your consultations. No? So I would say that I'm continuing, I'm still seeing myself no as finding my way through research because I was taught to do research in a compassionate manner. No? And perhaps we have our mentors no to thank for that, no? Because I believe that students learn how to do research the way that we teach them. They find their own strategies eventually, but the backbone of how they do research really comes from how we passionately teach them. No? So those are some no, of my own strategies, which are grounded from the principles of presented earlier no, by Ma'am Monique. So I'll return the space no, back to her.
Thank you, Ma'am Augil, Professor Robles. So I guess this is where we end for our session. We just like to remind you, no, in all of this in our session, teaching of psychology is meaningful engagement through resourceful and purposeful action. And be mindful of those actions. Are they meaningful or are they just compliance? Otherwise, it's just bordering lazy or demotivated or meaningless. No, and we want to create psychology students who love psychology and not just because it's psychology. Maraming salamat po.